Okay, everyone, we're gonna get started now. So thanks everyone for joining. So welcome everyone live, or if you see the recording of this. So yeah, warm welcome to another Executive Insights on product. This is another format of the Product Management Festival, and where we specifically invite very senior leaders, often former product leaders who have made a career as a product lead and then have become general managers or have worked a lot with executives and others on the business side. And we specifically want to shed a bit light on those interfaces, because we often feel PMs at this point know what they do. PM is established as a function, but there's really a big universe of business and executives out there that might not know in detail what PMs do, and or PMs that graduate to a business lead role might not always be aware of the wider business context. So this is the specific angle of this. We also have a few other formats. You of course know the Product Management Festival, of course. This is sort of the conference we're doing in Zurich in Singapore. We had thousands and thousands of folks coming along there. Just as a reminder of the other things, we have a Trends and Benchmarks study that we publish every year for free, where we sort of set the baseline for everything around what is happening in PM, what are sort of hard facts and numbers. So I encourage you to download that one. We do local PM nights in about 25 cities at this point. We have product exec circles that is sort of a similar format to this one, but in person in several cities across Europe and Asia. And then many of you know, and maybe some of you have actually been there, we also have a program together with INSEAD. This is a paid program. This is sort of a 1-week course. It's sort of targeted at senior PMs, but also want some business context. And the half taught by us and speakers and lecturers, and half taught by INSEAD. Talking about the Product Management Festival this year, the Zurich one, the Zurich chapter is coming up. So just quick plug, we have a wonderful roster of speakers. This is going to be an amazing year. We plan to do it in person. Nothing has changed there. So I'm very excited about going back into meeting all of you in person. And just as a plug, you could still get for a few more days 25% off of the tickets if you enter discount-executive. So that's sort of the code. If you would enter that, you could get a small discount, of 25% of the conference. So it would be great to actually see you there in person. So I already said most of this. This is a reminder of why we do this specific format. So this is targeted at people that really want to understand those interfaces, PM and business, and learn from the best of the best folks basically who have made this transition. And we're going to have another wonderful guest today in the discussion, Sara, who actually has done that journey. We're going to learn from her about sort of what happened there and what was her personal journey. So that's the goal here. Briefly about myself, many of you maybe know me. I've been a long time at Google, about over 13 years, been a senior director, mostly worked on Google Maps as a lead PM, and then on Google Shopping, which was a big business, $20 billion business for Google when I left. And now I'm actually spending almost all my time on the Product Management Festival, and also helping companies as part of the PMF on this consulting and sort of coaching PM leads. Yeah, that's it. And I would say now to our most important person today, which is Sara Wood. She, like I said, she's going to introduce herself in a moment, but she has exactly had that journey, from being a PM function lead to actually run businesses. She has been part of an IPO from Farfetch, but she's going to tell us her story in a moment. So with that, a very warm welcome to Sara. Hey, Sara.
Hi, everybody.
How's it going?
Yeah, good. Thank you. I'm dialing in from where I'm from, which is the bayous of Louisiana. So the Wi-Fi, if it's a little flaky, I apologize in advance.
But you don't live there right now, right? I think you live in London, if I'm not mistaken.
I do. I live in London. I sure do.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when have you moved over to Europe, if I may ask?
So yeah, I moved about 4 years ago. I was brought over from San Francisco to work for Farfetch, and this was pre-IPO Farfetch, just really looking at how to shape the product function, how to evolve it, how to scale it, and eventually take it public. So I moved there about 4 years ago. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So an American by upbringing, but then you made the move over to Europe. Yeah, and maybe that's a good segue. Maybe it's for folks just to get to know you a little bit better. Who are you, Sara? What is sort of your journey in a summary, and what should folks know about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a nomad. It's not my first time doing this type of work in Europe, but I've spent much of my career in San Francisco in the Bay Area, starting in the late 90s. I've been really lucky in my career. I started as kind of tinkering with computers when I was a kid, and timing had it that this became an actual career that you could, it's something you could do and get paid for, as I came into the .com world in the 90s in San Francisco. And I've always just been really still surprised to all these years later that I get paid for doing something that effectively was a hobby. It's not what I studied. So, as a result, I've been part of lots of startups from seed stage through to later stages. I've been part of a couple of IPOs, including the Farfetch I just mentioned, where I actually, as the product function, got to do the roadshow. I got to ring the bell on the New York Stock Exchange, and that's pretty exciting for a product, because often the product folks are kind of behind the scenes, doing the strategy and the work, but we're not front and center. So that was quite exciting. Fortune 500s. I've even done government work. I've worked for universities. But what I do is product. And even though I've moved into CEO type roles and general manager roles, I really, my spin is that product thinking. And I do think, I believe, maybe, obviously I'm biased, but the CEOs of the future are product thinkers. They're the people that can bring all the different threads together, understand the commercial models, but also connect it to how to execute. I really think it's an important skill set in the world, but specifically in tech. So,
yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, great. So much, a wealth of experiences that we should talk about. If you reflect maybe a little bit on, where you stand today with everything you mentioned, and where you landed in a way now, or maybe in the last couple of years, and the early days of your career, if you maybe do the big arc first, what is similar? What is different? How does the work feel for you these days? And kind of what's the delta?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just say I assume there are people on this call like me, but there are probably people that are the opposite of what I'm about to say, which is I wasn't very planful in my career in terms of I wanted to get to a certain place by a certain time. I didn't know what my career would look like. What I did care a lot about is how I spent my time every day and who I spent that time with. And are we working on something that I believe is fundamentally kind of good for the users, good for the team, good for the world? Not to be all lofty, but it's just more like, this is how I choose to spend my time every day. And I do challenge people who are in jobs that maybe they don't feel like happy, to be doing what they do. They might investigate that. I didn't have a lot of role models growing up. Where I grew up, there weren't many people working in kind of business roles. I'm from a farming family. But I did know that I loved computers, and I kind of followed that through, and that became, again, like my employable skill. I have said in the past, I think I've even said it in an interview, I think my most important learning along my career trajectory was when, I spent a long time waiting tables and bartending. And I feel in a kind of a weird way that's been the most impactful in my ability to do product for tech companies. mainly because you think about the experience that you're putting, and people out on a Friday night having date night or something, they're choosing to spend their money at your restaurant. It's a time investment, it's a money investment. Your job is to help orchestrate something and not be the center of attention, but help orchestrate an experience for an end user. And I do believe that some of my early learnings in my career that on paper, you're not going to see it on my LinkedIn, but are kind of the foundation for why I do what I do and how I do it. I really putting that user front and center, and learning kind of how to pull all those different parts into an overall experience that is kind of, a good experience. So yeah, my career isn't exactly what I had thought it would be, but I didn't really have a strong sense of, I need to go from A to B to C. I wasn't as planful as that. But I've landed in places that I've been very happy about. I've been careful with the choices I've made. Not to say I didn't care about the choices I made. I'm just saying I didn't know I would end up where I am now, 20 years ago.
I mean, I love what you said, that, you said you didn't maybe think it from the end, but you still have to have some, logic to connect the dots, from A to B to C. You already mentioned users, you mentioned colleagues and teams. What was the compass, or what was the inner, the driving force that lets you, with hindsight, what connected the dots for you in that journey?
Yeah, I think, early on it was, and as you grow through your career, and a lot of folks on the call will have kind of had to take a step change from maybe a very hands-on tactical role into something that's a little bit less. And that's a bit of reckoning you have to have with yourself, where maybe you don't feel you're adding the same value, but you realize there's value to be had in terms of, managing sideways or managing up, and more percentage of your time becomes communication rather than the actual execution. So in my early career, that obviously it was very execution focused. It was thinking about the experience of people who used your product, the products I was working on. But it was also, for me, a very creative outlet in terms of what can we do with emerging tech? What can we do with the data that we have access to that is new and unique, that is a bit of inventing that future rather than just following behind where we see the market going. And, again, for a long part of my career, that's where I spent most of my time, is just really thinking how to pull all those threads together. Again, it wasn't through the lens of how do I grow my career into higher levels. It was more, how do I create experiences for the consumer that are good for the world, good for the user, good for frankly, for the team that are building it, i.e. the staff that you work with, your teammates. I think that's a really important consideration. And are you doing something interesting and unique? Are you putting something new out into the world, or new thought into the world? I think that was my motivator, and it is still from, early on. And as I gained experience, that changed a bit. Like what I did day to day changed. I sometimes joke that my job is I'm a professional meeting attendee, which doesn't sound great, but at the end of the day, there's so much communications that happens kind of upwards, sideways, with the teams, with the users, pulling all of that together, and more percentage of your time is spent kind of doing the sideways and up when you get higher up. Remembering that the value still is creating that safe space for the people who are not tinkering, but really thinking about how to use business data, how to think about consumer, like buffering them and creating the conditions so that they can do the work that they do, and stay close to the problem space, stay close to the user. Again, I started there very close to the user. I've moved away from that a bit. I do sometimes miss it, but I do know kind of the job of a leader is to really make sure that, like, your job almost becomes like admin for the folks that are doing the real work, even though obviously sitting in meetings is I'm being pejorative. I'm not meaning it that way. It's an important function to communicate, but I do sometimes miss the hands-on. But as that percentage of my time changed from problem space and user experience into creating the conditions for the team to do that, Yeah, I've had to really ask myself, like, is this what I want to be spending my time on too? And it is, like, I enjoy it. I enjoy the team part and building culture and all of that. That's something I actually enjoy.
Do you ever get your hands dirty on something? And if so, I mean, are there any rules, any conditions? I mean, it sounds like you like delegating, or you like, building up teams that can do the work. But is there a moment when you say to yourself, now I should go deep, or now I should, invest or help or support functionally?
Yeah, for sure, there are more times than I allow myself that where I feel like I should. And I realize that's me putting my own, kind of spin on what I think is the right answer. And I think, part of being a leader is knowing how to ask the question. It's really around how do you set up a series of questions or conversations that lead us as a group to come to a certain outcome together. Now, do I participate in some of the hands-on pieces? Yes, sometimes. Am I the best at it anymore? Probably not. Some of the things that I feel like, oh, I'm really good at this, let me get in there, I'm probably not that good at it as I'd like to think I am. Like, I haven't written a line of code in, God, a decade. But so there are times where I have that instinct, but then I realize it still needs to be, regardless if I can do the hands-on, it still needs to be part of kind of an alignment, like building that collaboration concept. How do people feel that they've been bought into the decision making, and what is my role in that? And I think typically where I land is my role is, yes, I'd love to get a little more hands-on. I definitely want to see the data. I do look at the dashboards. I do kind of infer my own kind of my hypothesis against what I'm seeing. But I don't typically, at least anymore, come out with and then we should do this. The only time I do that really hands-on is, I think it's hugely important for fast, like, decision making is a make or break for most companies. And the faster you can make decisions and either fail and move on, or see something interesting and keep going, that's a make or break it, like I said. And often, if you have a certain title, people look to you for making that decision quickly. I think certainly given, years of experience, you can pattern match maybe faster than others. Maybe you've seen it before, or you're seeing it from a kind of a 30,000 foot view that people who are too close to the problem aren't seeing it. So maybe the conversation is in that. But then there's also that bit of recognizing when, maybe there's people who are a little too quiet and not giving their opinion. And some of that experience leads you to say, like, actually, I'm not going to come in with that fast decision making, because there's probably more here that's not being said, because people maybe don't have the title or don't have the confidence. And again, it's back to that. How do you create conditions for success within a culture? How do you foster a culture where you're listening to everyone, even if, it takes you a little bit longer to get to a decision, although fast decision's important. The value of having everybody bought into that and feeling they were part of that decision, and the speed in which then they can execute because they're bought in. There's not a lot of noise and churn behind the scenes. It's figuring out that balance. So yes, long story short, I do like to get hands-on. I do recognize, though, that sometimes, particularly if you have a certain title, that's more disruptive than helpful, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
When I reflect on my own journey at Google, where I also, was quite senior, there's actually something funny about Google's culture. I don't know how it is at other companies, where there's still, it's sort of expected from executives to show their tactical skills from time to time, and sometimes actually, I sometimes call it hero syndrome. There's something that tempts executives or senior leaders to show from time to time that they can still, pound their fist on the table and get stuff done directly. But one thing I always worried about, and I think my style was that I was always very careful with those things, because I always felt you're taking on responsibility as a leader for that moment, right? And what you're in a way indirectly teaching your team is that you don't hold them accountable, right?
Yeah.
Or you don't encourage them to find a solution. But basically, there's some transfer of responsibility at the moment, you offer that help. And even though it comes from a position of power, it is actually not necessarily empowering the team, right? You're actually empowering yourself and take away control of the team. And even though, and I had a bit of a reputation in Google that I was quick to delegate. And this was sort of an unusual role model in Google because, like I said, I think most Google executives, and also there's a lot of technical executives at Google that still love to read the code and show that they understand the code. But I always felt long term, it's a good investment into the team if the team knows they own it, and they own it with all consequences, good or bad, right? And if something breaks, it's also on them to fix it, or some decision has to be made. Yeah.
It's interesting because I don't, I've not worked at Google, but that's not unique to, as you can imagine. A few things occurred to me. One is that last bit you said, which is that sense of not empowerment only, but accountability, and if it breaks, that sort of thing. And you're not, I don't think, doing right by Google or whomever you work for if you're not investing in those layers below to be able to do this, on the day that you leave. You're really investing in the future of that team and that company. And at an individual level, that's, that can change a career if they've had a good mentor and access to the conversation and understanding why decisions are, being discussed. The other thing I think as a leader, and it sounds like you did this, which is taking the accountability for decisions. If it's a failure, you own it. But if it's a success, I certainly hope that you're giving that to the folks that did the work. And I think through that, people start to feel a bit safer, putting their neck out, putting ideas out there, wanting to learn, and make decisions fast, but knowing that it's a safe way to do it because you as a team and you as a leader are in it with them. And while you might not be doing the hands-on, even it might not have been your decision. If there's a failure, you stand up in front of the company and own it. And if it's a success, hopefully that product owner, manager gets to stand up, or the engineering lead, or whomever gets to really show the pride of work. Another thing that occurs to me is just the cultural angle. And I don't mean company culture, I mean kind of across the world. I've done a number of, deals with people in different countries, and I'm always like, even moving to Britain, the culture in Britain is so different than what I'm used to in the States. I think I come across as a little bit pushy or kind of brash for a lot of people. But one of the things that I always found fascinating, at one of the startups, we did a lot of work with Japanese companies. So I can remember some sessions with Sony executives where it wasn't until after that I realized the person who was literally the most quiet, the sat in the back, said nothing, was in fact the boss's boss's boss. And it was the person that was in front, like calling the shots, showing the confidence, really out there. That was the most junior person.
Oh, wow.
And you compare that to the States and to a lot of Western, and it's the exact opposite. It's like
the
you
exact
said,
opposite.
yeah, the boss is meant to have the answer. And I think that's something that, we need to challenge. I think, at an individual level, and I know I don't have all the best answers, but I think collectively, we need to challenge that. I do sometimes feel that I need to jump in with, don't worry, we got it, confidence, but I don't know that that's always the best for the team, or even for the outcome of that decision. So anyways, just an observation. Yeah.
By the way, side comment to your culture comment, and I love the comment you just made. And I'm also used to very diverse environments. Like when I studied at my business school, it was very diverse, and also the Google is a microcosm, because I spent the majority of actually all my time in Switzerland, which was a microcosm of nationalities. There's a fantastic book just for folks on the line that maybe want to read up on those things. I don't know if you know the book, Sarah, by chance. It's called Culture Map.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you heard of it, Sarah?
Yeah. I haven't read it,
You
but
read
I,
it
I
yet?
have
Okay.
a I have a big list of to read books, and
Yeah.
there's yeah.
What I love about the book is it's very actionable and very concrete in terms of, she's an insect professor, and she goes through like something you just said, I don't know whether it's actually one of her dimensions, but it could be like level of active interaction, level of passive interaction, right? Or kind of something like willingness to confront versus be sort of very respectful and safe face for others, right? So basically she goes through cultures. Actually, she goes through them, like German cultures, Japanese cultures, Asian cultures, American cultures, and then tries to map them on different dimensions, and then kind of she shows kind of classical traps or things that could go wrong, and misunderstandings, right, that are easy to see if you see that people see the world very differently. So anyways, I just wanted to plug that book because it helped me quite a bit to actually even only realize my own bias, right, in a meeting. In my own, I have a certain from Germany, I'm Swiss as well, but I guess spend a lot of time in American companies. So anyways, just wanted to plug that one.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it does tie back. I mean, I forget his name, Edward something. There was a book, early anthropology, called Beyond Culture, and it introduced this idea of low and high context, and people who are quite leaning forward and like aggressive versus I get it done with softer skills. Yeah, there's definitely something in our nature as humans that kind of guide us into these behaviors. I find it interesting as well.
Yeah. When we go back to this transition question, right, of functional lead, general manager, and you're expanding your scope, expanding your responsibilities beyond the core functional function. Any pitfalls, anything you wish you had known before, any learnings for yourself, anything that surprised you looking back?
Lots. I mean, lots. And I do think that I've mellowed. I think in my, things that serve you at certain stages in your career where you have to really lean forward and struggle and fight and make your case. Maybe those don't serve you so well in later stages. There are things that got you to a certain place, but you need to then really be honest about behaviors that no longer serve you. It's not appropriate anymore. One thing we haven't talked about, but in that transition that is important to me, I talk about it a lot. It's not always, kind of tactically what is the job, but I do think that as you move into leadership, you have, I'd say, a moral imperative for culture, modeling behavior, creating what we talked about, these conditions for success. And, people do look up to leaders and say, well, if, that guy got what he wanted by throwing laptops around and shoving chairs and cursing people, maybe that's the behavior that is works here and will get me ahead. And obviously, I don't think anybody wants to work with those types of people. But I think that if you take that concept of a moral imperative as a leader for the culture that you're building, and it's almost like, sorry to talk like Immanuel Kant thinking, the categorical imperative then and then what happens? How is what you're doing and the culture you're building and the product you're building, how is that pushed into the world in a way that is not only good for your users, which we talked about, which is how you do the business of product is really about building the right thing for customers, users, but also for people who are impacted by your product that don't use your product. So, we've seen a lot in the last few years around kind of the byproducts of technology that's made into the world, and it affects people that have never even logged on to that system. And I think that is where it moves from a moral into a categorical imperative around, are we doing right? Is there a way to do this ethically? Are my morals in line with the culture? And then are the cultural values not only just values on a piece of paper that people hang on the wall at the office, but are they manifested in the behaviors of the executives? And I talk about that a lot because I do fundamentally believe culture comes from the top. If the vision and the behavior of the top isn't in line with why people are excited to come work there, and you're not making a good place for people to work at that local level, the moral, like the moral piece for the team, I think there's I think that we can do better. And I think a lot of people, I'm not the only one to start speaking about this. I think a lot of people in the industry are talking more and more about this and how do we do better? And I think for the first, few decades of this industry, people were just running as fast as they can to figure out business models and, emerging tech and, tech changes, and there's new stuff every day. And we're moving into the next phase of network technologies that's going to bring in all kinds of new ways of working and communicating. And even with COVID, how we're having to make accommodations for people working in different locations. Like I'm dialing into you from a pretty random place I wouldn't normally be. It's changing very fast. And I think that we really need to then consider that it goes above and beyond that individual, like, did that feature work? Did that decision fail or not? I think there's kind of that keeping in mind as a leader that how you radiate out into the world and what you're putting out into the world and the responsibility for that. I mean, it's a huge responsibility to have this right that we have, those of us on the call, to build product in the first place. Like it's a great thing that we get to do, but we need to consider that we have a responsibility to the to people who are impacted, and that's not just the people in your team or in your company, that's your users, but it's oftentimes people who don't even know you exist. And so that's something that I think a lot about in that transition. You as a leader and people who move into executive roles, I think I'd like to see more people talking about this and understanding that part of that job is now not just figuring out what user stories can deliver that outcome, but then what's the thing? What's in 5 years from now? Have we done a good thing for the world? Really having that be part of the conversation now. I think it is. I think it's changing. A lot of news cycles too are spent on this. So, but yeah, that's something I do think should be in people's mind as they move into these higher roles, that you represent that vision and you represent what the ethics and the values of that company are. And I think it's an important one. But
when I reflect about, I love what you're saying here. When I reflect on my own journey in Google, when I was running, or partially leading Google Maps, one of the cool things about Google Maps is it's a very uncontroversial product. I have yet to find a person that doesn't, at least like it or use it, right? I mean, it's a very innocent product, right? That genuinely, I think, is an invention, I mean, way before my time, right? That has made the world a better place. But then I moved to Google Shopping. And like I said, I think it was a huge business in the end. In the end, I think it was about 1/6 of Google's revenues. And I have to say, I struggled with some of the, I would say, different objectives as a leader I had to face. Because to put it bluntly, on Google Maps, nobody cared about the revenues because it was an investment. It was just a consumer product and to some extent a base stack for the company. Whereas Google Shopping was directly, an Amazon competitor. It was a lot about actually retailers having a chance against Amazon. So there was a lot of competition, and I don't want to make it a moral thing. This would be way too much, but your categorical imperative made me a bit think, I'm sure there were moments when at least I didn't feel completely free to optimize for something, I wanted to optimize, right? And I struggled with when I'm not saying this is why I left. I mean, I left for several reasons, but I felt in the end when I had such a big responsibility, it's basically, it's not only my choices. At that point, you're making choices for the company, and the company has its own gravitas and responsibilities, and it's actually, it can be quite a pressure, this business pressure.
I love that one, and I spent time how we met was through shopping and retail. I think there's something really fascinating about how to take that need in the world and apply this lens of how to make it better. And certainly there are, business metrics. There's, is this incremental to the top line? How are we going to pull it down through? Like, you have to run a business. We're all grown-ups. We have to make money to be able to have the right to spend the money to build better stuff. But I think with some of these, if you really think about it in an abstract way, it's not even that abstract. People have to shop. We all wear clothes. We all got up and put something on today. We eat food, how do you, knowing that some of those are very emotional decisions, like, how you dress and appear to the world is very personal to you. And it's something that we're all going to do. And it's an expression issues, there's emotions, there's like practicality involved, there's winter, I need a coat. So knowing that that's just the human experience, how can you play your part to guide those, by asking questions, frankly, to help guide like hearts and minds really towards better solutions that, do encompass the ethics and the morality with the true, like the hard business. I think there's a way to do both. I don't think that companies have to just slash and burn and, margins super thin to survive. I think, there's models out there where, good ethical businesses that are making decisions for the good of their team, their users, but also the world, because they're standing for something. They have a really good, healthy business. And I think there's a way to do that. And I think, more and more people, as they understand issues around sustainability and climate change, and, if you do have that one box sent to you that only has the one item, it is the equivalent of a single-use plastic bottle. It's like, I might as well be drinking out of a throwaway plastic bottle by doing that one shipment, because the end-to-end supply chain is quite expensive, and the impact is high. Like, I think if you start to put all that in the hopper and really ask the question and facilitate the conversation, you can come up with maybe not the best, the best thing for the climate, but at least it's a step towards. And that's why I'm saying, if it's not the leaders asking those questions, it's certainly not going to be the junior folks who are really just trying to prove they can deliver on their numbers. And, people have targets to hit, they have OKRs. They're going to, hell or high water hit those because they want to do well. They want to do right by the company, but it's up then, like I said, that kind of categorical imperative is up to the leaders to ask it in a way that is, and then is this good for the world? And maybe it's not, maybe the answer is no, but we need to do this to get to the other side. But we commit to each other and we look each other in the eye, and we're going to really challenge our issues around supply chain, or, knowing that everybody has to shop. We all shop. So how do you put better experiences out there that are as good or better, so the end user wants to use them, but then tie to something that, like I said, is a bit more thoughtful. I think there's a way to do it. But I felt the same as you when I worked in retail, but I still love the retail space because it was just something so interesting in cracking that nut, because we all have to shop. We all have to get dressed in the morning. So I don't know.
And by the way, about when you say, leaders maybe, what you're basically saying is leaders should be the ones, raising those questions and flagging them. And I think on the one hand, you could say, well, but leaders are under immense pressure and business and OKRs. But I think exactly like you just did, you could also flip it around and say, I'm actually convinced that if you have a mission, a genuine mission as a company, and that mission is human, is forward-looking, and is inspiring, good things will follow from that, right? And I think if you genuinely portray that, I think your customers will feel that, if it's not just positioning that's actually real. But also, by the way, I think teams feel that, and many intelligent people actually want to work for leaders that are inspiring and don't just look at their at the numbers, right, and revenues, but actually want to change something or have some impact. So
100%.
It could actually be a competitive advantage at some point.
I agree, and just in the struggle to attract and retain talent in today's world is, it's a huge, it's immense challenge. And I think if you have a bit of this, I'm not saying to like kind of what greenwash your operations, but I'm saying if that is true and it's coming from a place of like authenticity, that leaders care about this, you're right, it becomes a competitive advantage. Because if you're really listening and you're paying attention to the conversations on Slack and what have you, people are asking these questions. They might be asking to each other because they're afraid to really call it out in a town hall or something, but they do care. People care, and people have choice. You know, I know my kids kind of that these will be important considerations as they go to university and enter the workforce. They don't have to just work for anyone. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think maybe in our era we did. Like I was super thrilled to come out of university and, you know, I would have done anything. But now I think, you know, given this where tech is, there's just so many startups, so many companies. Every company is now a tech company. Even if they sell blue jeans, they're underpinned by technology. So people have choice. And you saw that with COVID. People voted with their feet. So many people in our industry have left jobs, good jobs, because I would argue maybe because the culture of the team or the morals of the company weren't in line with their own. So I do think it's really an important thing to think about. Yeah.
So for our audience, I would love folks to, if you want, ask Sara any questions you would like. And the way we're going to do this, and maybe you start to think about a few questions, put them in the chat, please. And then I will select a few. And then I would love you to just put on audio and video if you want, and then just ask the question straight to Sara to make it a bit more interactive. But first, put it in the chat, please, so I can pick and choose a bit. So while everybody's getting ready with their questions, maybe one sort of final question from me, Sara. Sort of, we touched on the subject of PM lead and business lead and sort of the functional product sphere and then the business sphere. If you think about, you know, those boundaries, those interfaces, if you think about your own experiences, but also if you think about maybe business leads looking at product and maybe realizing, okay, we have to do something. We have to, kind of appreciate this product thing, but maybe because they don't have the educational experience, maybe they lack the how. Do you have any thoughts on those interfaces and anything we all could learn, or you have learned, or maybe some, advice for managing those, different worlds?
It's a really good one. And I wish I had like, here's the playbook for how to do that. I think in my own experience, these interfaces have been some of my most challenging times in my career, where maybe I didn't show up as collaborative as I should. I was too focused on the product as a methodology and people wanting, like, adapting to understanding the product methodology, as opposed to let's make it work. We have different disciplines and backgrounds and agendas. So it is a really tricky one, and I haven't always gotten it right. But I would say on one side, like, if people are coming to this from the business side and wanting to understand product, really, the thing I would ask is to know that the product function, and by product function, that is product development. So that is kind of almost partnering with, it's design, it's data, it's the engineering partners, knowing that function is really a push and pull, and you'll never go fast enough. You'll never hit it. There's so much in that push and pull, and there's so much kind of minute by minute compromise, or kind of I'm making the best decision with the data that I have right now that happens. And it's not because product people think they have all the answers, or that it's their call, or some people say that you're the CEO of your product. I don't say that. I think it's really important for business people to know that we want to partner and we want to help. But what's not helpful is just the push, knowing that we're pulled in another place. And, the number of times I've heard questions like, is there any way we can accelerate this? It's like, well, do you think that we want to go slow? Like, no, we don't. Like, if I hear that question one more time, like, there's just certain ways to frame the questions and the conversations around how do we partner and collaborate as business leaders to a better outcome, as opposed to, I have this great idea, toss it over the wall, product should build it. I don't want to know anything about how the sausage is made. I just want it to go fast. And that's kind of my jaded, like, you can now see why I've maybe gotten into some conversations that weren't my proudest. The other side, though, I would say for product execs is I have worked with some pretty arrogant product leaders. And I know I've probably been this at times where we, think it's our call to make, and without recognizing there's a lot of different people that will be impacted by that decision. So, that I've said before, I used to say to teams, like, you're a shepherd, you're not a king. Your job is to help bring people together and to understand why we all need to be brought together and facilitate that using product methodology, but you're not the kingmaker. And sometimes you're going to need to make a call, and you're unpopular and nobody liked your call, but somebody needed to make the decision. And that does fall on the role of product. And we're often the unpopular one in the room for doing so. But I think if you're running that at 100% of how you operate as a product leader, you're doing something wrong, because you really should be optimizing more for that shepherd role. So that would be something that I would say is truly important. Investing in those relationships at a personal level as well. Sometimes it's hard when you're doing that, the cross into different, product into marketing, for example, is historically a very difficult relationship. And there's reasons why. And it's a lot of creativity going into both. But taking that time to invest in knowing the person as a human, not just as a function. You can't speak enough to that. In COVID times, it's harder. You're not going to have a beer after work, but understanding where people are coming from and listening and shepherding, not just saying this is a product decision, I think is the most important thing. But yeah, I've not always done this well.
By the way, I can only emphasize exactly what you said. I think for me, especially at the end in Google, I was interfacing with hundreds of cross-functional folks, right? And I think instead of coming out of positioning me as an authority, I think more and more I try to position myself as a human and as a person everybody could talk to, right? And I would just say, I think, there's sometimes this saying, maybe folks know this saying, what brought you here won't get you there, right? And I would say it wasn't being even more of a PM lead or an opinionated PM lead or having 5 more metrics that I think helped me there. I think it was the human side of it, it was, 100%. And actually even the time out of, like you said, the beer, right? It doesn't have to be beer, but it has to be the genuine human interaction, right? Versus the meeting room or the Zoom call that is by definition more functional, right? And more goal oriented, right? And
I think it's funny that what got you here won't get you there. That's 100%. I think that's probably the takeaway for that question in general is, and on all sides, but I think it's, to the folks on this call who are in that product function or in the executive function, it's knowing what to leave behind that got you here and it was successful and it's a tactic. But it's almost like, when you're a kid, you might have some quirky personality. And as you get older, that just becomes like weird and eccentric. And it's like, well, you evolve as a human. And I think keeping that way of thinking and kind of like, what is serving you? Are you building healthy relationships at a human level? Is that helping your teams feel supported? And is it helping the partnership between marketing and product feel more, less like a fight and more like a collaboration? I think that's the main takeaway is what got you here won't get you there. Absolutely. I think people need to retire some behaviors that may have really been important earlier in their career, but no longer serve them.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, Cesar, I would love, he just put in a question. Maybe Cesar, maybe you want to speak out and ask the question straight to Sarah?
Sure. Thanks, Rafael. Let me just turn on the webcam. Hi, Sarah. Well, let me repeat what I said in the chat. So thanks for sharing your knowledge and experience. It was really great journey and great to learn a little bit more from you and from that journey. My question is specific, is about the road to IPO. I don't know if you did that in other companies, but I know you did in Farfetch. So from your perspective as a product leader, what were the main steps or the main things you did when you joined the company, specifically in product organization, of course? And I guess in hindsight, would you have done something different from what you did?
It's a good question. And after the IPO, I actually did a series of, it was leading the product, I think, the Australian ones, where I did it on this topic, because I think a lot of product people are curious about this. I think, many of us who work in startups, a private company, we think, will we have this experience one day? I will first say that for Farfetch, the fact that I was part of the roadshow, pitching to analysts, talking to bankers, and then on the day of getting to be part of the celebration was amazing. And that really was a testament to the leadership of Farfetch. The CEO, Jose, believes in the product function and the impact it had on his business, and really felt it should be at the table. And that isn't always true. Often product, I've been lucky. I've sat on a lot of boards of companies as the product exec, but not all companies have the product person in the room. And I think, again, I've been pretty careful about joining companies that believe in that product piece, and Jose certainly was. So that's why I was there. There's definitely some tactical things that needed to be done to build us towards IPO. Some of it was around value creation for the business to get the valuation that we believed, and really investing in some key areas. Others were, are we structured from an org design point of view even to scale this business? The org design is a secret weapon for product. Are we organized in a way that we can really scale and grow as we hope to, as we go towards IPO and beyond? And there's work that needs to be done. There's other kind of hygiene issues that needed to be done, which is get our arms around the numbers. So not only, do we have the right OKRs and are we all aligned? More like, do we know the value that we're creating, from even down to a feature level, and really taking almost a kind of financial portfolio investment approach to the way you build product. And that's not often in the discipline of product teams. I feel very strongly that it should be. But if you can't say why you're doing something, it might be, we believe it's a strategic thing and we should try it, but it might be like, we actually believe there's a business case here and we're willing to put 10% of our operating capital towards that. I think you should have an understanding around the finances and the impact. And that was just something that I started to work to put in place for Farfetch. All of that leads into the fact is, when you're working in product in a startup, before you go public, you have a lot of creative leeway. You don't often have to show those numbers. You can go to the board and you can be like, we're doing this really cool thing. Once you go public, some of that risk taking goes away. Your numbers are now discussed on a quarterly earnings call, and there's a lot of eyeballs on it. And there's a lot of kind of opinions out in the world, about, was that a good thing to do or not, or should it take so long and or not? And it's hard to operate in that world if you don't kind of have your own evidence base for the decisions that you're making. And so I do encourage all product teams to, whether you're on the road to IPO or not, and even if you're already public, to really have your house in order around kind of defensibility of decisions that you're making that is above and beyond, oh, it's on the roadmap, or the partner wants it, or the usability test says we should do it. I think there's a little bit more kind of financial responsibility that product teams can work into their process. that allows you to go IPO in a way that's credible and to stand by product as a kind of a really important lever for how you take risk for a company and how people believe that valuation will grow over time. So yeah, some tactical stuff was a kind of this portfolio of investments methodology. It was kind of strategic org design for scale, and for speed of execution, all that sort of stuff. It was really aligning high level kind of long-term strategy against the challenges of the right now. So all of those were things that definitely needed to be pulled together in advance of that IPO for Farfetch. But like I said, some of these are things I think any company should do, whether they are IPOing soon or not. Or again, I've worked in public companies as well and have retrofitted some of this into already public companies that already had ways of working. But I think that financial piece is probably the biggest piece I would recommend, is really getting your arms around the data around ROI, what types of KPIs do these impact, so that when you are going head to head with, do we do M&A, or do we invest in this capability, or do we put the money towards, customer acquisition, there's a bit more apples to apples conversation around the product piece that often isn't there. I'm kind of rambling now, but it's that portfolio of investments approach that I would recommend. And that is one thing that we did at Farfetch to lead to that. I'm not sure if I answered your question totally, but
I think you did.
You
No,
did,
this was
you
okay.
did for sure.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Sara.
Thank you much. Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Cesar. Perfect. I think this was a great final question then. Sara, I want to thank you so much for this great conversation. I love the human touch, and I think your passion for what I would call a moral compass or an inner compass, and being confident in that. I really empathize with that as well in my own journey. And yeah, very inspiring. And thank you so much for your time, Sara.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love to chat about this stuff. So yeah, I'm really happy to have been invited. Thank you. Yeah.
And hope to see you soon, maybe as a speaker at PMF or at other events. And thank you so much, Sara.
Great. Thanks. Thanks to everybody.
Thank you, David, for this comment. Thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.